Billionaire's mother slapped poor cleaner. She said quietly, "I forgive you, I know your secret." The slap heard through marble halls. The Calloway mansion sat on the northern edge of Lincoln Park like a declaration of war against ordinary life. 4 stories of limestone and steel-reinforced glass rose above the tree line, its facade catching the flat January light of Chicago and throwing it back at the street as if the building itself found the neighborhood beneath it slightly unimpressive. The iron gate at the entrance bore the Calloway name in raised letters. Not a nameplate, but a pronouncement. Loretta Mae Simmons had cleaned that gate every Tuesday and Friday for 11 months. She arrived at 6:15 in the morning, as she always did, her breath making small white clouds in the air, her rubber-soled boots leaving faint prints on the salted driveway. She wore her uniform, navy blue with yellow trim on the collar, the logo of Premier Home Services embroidered above her left breast pocket. She carried her caddy in her right hand. Spray bottles, microfiber cloths, a roll of trash bags, a small bottle of the eucalyptus cleaner that Mrs. Paulson, the head housekeeper, insisted on for the marble entry hall. Loretta was 26 years old. She had a face that people noticed without always understanding why, not conventionally beautiful in the way magazines described beauty, but striking in a way that stayed with you. High cheekbones, eyes the color of dark amber, steady and unhurried. She wore her hair pulled back tight under a headband, practical and without ceremony. She did not wear jewelry to work. She did not wear perfume. She had learned a long time ago that the less space you occupied in a place like this, the smoother the day went. She used her staff key to enter through the side door, the service entrance tucked behind a row of sculpted hedges that had been trimmed into perfect rectangles. The side door opened into a mudroom, coat hooks, a bench, a storage closet, a wall-mounted tablet where staff checked in and logged their hours. Loretta tapped her ID badge to the screen, heard the soft beep of confirmation, and began unwrapping her coat. "She's in a mood," said Desta, already there, already in her uniform, already drinking coffee from a travel mug she'd brought from home because she refused to drink the staff's instant. Desta Okafor was Loretta's closest friend. 31 years old, originally from Lagos, by way of Toronto, by way of the south side of Chicago, and she had an extraordinary gift for reading a room, or in this case a mansion, before she'd set foot in it. "How bad?" Loretta asked, hanging her coat. "I heard her on the phone from the driveway." Desta lowered her voice. "Something about the board, something about Theron not listening." She shook her head. "When she's unhappy about Theron, we suffer." Loretta nodded. She had learned this too, that Celestine Calloway's moods traveled through the house the way weather moved through open country. You felt them before you saw them. You adjusted. She picked up her caddy and moved into the main house. The entry hall of the Calloway mansion was the first thing every visitor saw, and the last thing they forgot. Italian marble floors in alternating panels of cream and charcoal. A curved staircase in dark walnut rising to a landing wide enough to park 2 cars on. Overhead, a chandelier of hand-blown glass, 12 feet in diameter, each piece custom-made in Venice, hung like a frozen explosion of light. Family portraits lined the upper wall, formal, oil on canvas, the Calloways rendered in oils with the kind of seriousness that wanted to be mistaken for history. Loretta had memorized every inch of this room. She knew which tiles held more dust along the grout lines. She knew that the base of the chandelier collected a fine film of moisture in winter. She knew that the portrait at the far end, a woman in a burgundy dress painted sometime in the 1980s, always collected more smudges than the others, as if people couldn't help touching the frame when they passed it. She had never asked who the woman was. She was on her knees in the far corner, working on a stubborn scuff mark near the baseboard, when she heard the heels, Celestine Calloway's footsteps were unmistakable, a sharp, deliberate click against marble, each step placed with the precision of someone who had spent decades making certain that every room she entered understood she was arriving. She was 62 years old and wore it the way some women wear diamonds, consciously, proudly, as proof of something. Silver hair swept back from her face, skin meticulously maintained, dressed at 7 in the morning in a cream-colored pantsuit that most women would have reserved for a charity luncheon. She wore a single strand of pearls. She wore reading glasses on a gold chain. She wore the expression of a woman who had decided, before leaving her bedroom, that today would not be a day she tolerated anything. She was not alone. Behind her walked 2 members of her household staff, Garrett, the house manager, and a young woman Loretta didn't recognize, probably a new hire. And at the base of the staircase, descending with a phone to his ear and his suit jacket hooked over one finger, was Theron Calloway himself. Theron was 45. He had his mother's bone structure and his father's height. 6'2", broad-shouldered, with the particular kind of physical presence that came not from vanity, but from years of carrying real weight. He ran Calloway Development Group, one of the largest private real estate and infrastructure firms in the Midwest, and he moved through spaces with the unhurried confidence of a man who had learned that the fastest way to communicate authority was to never appear rushed. His phone call ended as he reached the bottom of the stairs. He pocketed the phone. He noticed Loretta. He gave a brief, courteous nod, the kind he gave all the staff, practiced and genuine, in a way that felt different from his mother's management of the same dynamic. Loretta returned to the baseboard. She didn't hear Celestine approach. The sound of those heels stopped somewhere behind her, and then, before she understood what was happening, a voice cut across the hall like a whip crack. "Excuse me." Loretta turned. Celestine was standing 3 feet away, looking down at her with an expression so precisely calibrated between contempt and impatience that it seemed almost architectural. "What?" Celestine said, her voice carrying the cool, unhurried clarity of someone who never needed to raise it. "Is that smell?" Loretta blinked. "Ma'am, that," Celestine's nose wrinkled, "that cleaning product. It smells like a hospital waiting room. I've told your company 3 times. 3 times. I do not want eucalyptus in this hall." Loretta stood. She kept her voice level. "I'm sorry, ma'am. This is the product Mrs. Paulson approved for the marble. I can speak with her about a substitute." "Mrs. Paulson doesn't live in this house." Celestine took a step closer. "I do. And when I tell your company something, I expect it to reach the people doing the work, not get lost somewhere between the office and the front door." "I understand. I'll make sure." "You'll make sure." Celestine repeated the words the way you repeat something said by a child who has gotten the math wrong. "Do you know how many times I have been told that? Do you know how many times I've walked into my own home and been subjected to—" She gestured vaguely at Loretta's caddy. "All of this? The products, the noise, the schedule disruptions?" Theron had stopped at the edge of the hall. He was watching. His expression was careful, unreadable. "Mother," he said. One word. Quiet, carrying a weight she chose not to receive. Celestine turned to him. "I'm having a conversation. You're talking to the cleaning staff about eucalyptus at 7 in the morning. I'm talking about standards." She turned back to Loretta, who had not moved, who had not changed her expression, who was simply standing there in her blue uniform with her yellow-trimmed collar and her caddy in her hand, watching Celestine with eyes that were patient and steady and utterly unafraid. Something about that stillness seemed to irritate Celestine beyond what the eucalyptus had managed. "Do you even understand what I'm telling you?" she said. "Or do I need to have this conversation with someone at your company who can actually—" And then it happened. No one in the room could later say exactly what caused it. Whether it was the gesture Celestine made, reaching toward the caddy in Loretta's hand as if to take it from her, or whether Loretta moved slightly to the side, or whether it was simply the arc of Celestine's arm following through a motion begun in frustration. But the sound was unmistakable. Sharp, flat, the sound of an open palm connecting with a cheek. The hall went silent. Garrett stiffened. The new hire took a half-step back. Theron went very still. Loretta stood with her face turned slightly to one side, one hand still holding the caddy, the other hanging at her side. A slow, deep breath rose through her chest and fell. The mark of the slap bloomed red on her left cheek, like a secret being told against someone's will. She did not cry. She did not reach up to touch her face. She did not raise her voice. She turned slowly back to Celestine Calloway. And what Celestine saw in those amber eyes was not rage, was not humiliation, was not fear. It was something that landed much harder than any of those things. It was pity, and beneath it, knowledge. The quiet, specific, devastating kind. Loretta's lips parted. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, low enough that only Celestine could be certain of every word, though the silence in that marble hall carried sound in ways that large spaces sometimes do. "I forgive you," Loretta said. "I know your secret." The color left Celestine Calloway's face, not the slow retreat of embarrassment or the fading of anger. Something total, something that moved from her skin inward, as if her blood had made a decision. Her lips parted, her jaw moved without producing sound. Her hand, the one that had struck, hung in the air for a moment before falling to her side. She looked, for the first time in possibly decades, like someone who was afraid. Loretta picked up her caddy from where it had shifted on the floor, turned with complete composure, and walked toward the service corridor. Theron stood at the foot of the staircase and watched her go. He didn't call after her. He didn't move to stop her. He stood in the silence of that enormous hall, surrounded by marble and glass, and the portraits of his family, and felt something he didn't have a name for yet, though it had something to do with the way a woman could stand perfectly still in the middle of a storm and make the storm feel embarrassed of itself. He looked at his mother. Celestine was staring at the door through which Loretta had disappeared. She had not moved. She had not spoken. The pearls at her throat rose and fell with breathing that had become shallow and rapid. "What did she mean?" Theron asked. His mother didn't answer. "Mom." His voice was soft but precise, the way he spoke in a boardroom when someone was trying to run the clock. "What did she mean?" Celestine Calloway, who had faced down judges, bankers, city council members, and one very famous senator at a fundraiser in 2019 without so much as blinking, looked at her son and said nothing. And in her silence, the question became the loudest thing in the room. Outside, in the service corridor, Loretta Mae Simmons leaned against the cold wall and closed her eyes. She pressed 2 fingers to her cheek, still warm, still stinging. She breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth, 3 times, the way her mother had taught her. She had not planned to say it. Not today, not yet. But some things, she was learning, had their own timing. She opened her eyes, picked up her caddy, and went back to work. 17 years in a locked drawer. The apartment on West 59th Street in Englewood had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen the size of a generous closet, and a radiator that hissed and clanked through every winter night like an old man complaining about his knees. The windows looked out onto a narrow street where the bodega on the corner kept its lights on until 2 in the morning, and the neighbors across the way had a wind chime on their fire escape that sang in any weather. The carpet in the hallway needed replacing. The ceiling in the second bedroom had a water stain shaped if you were in a certain mood, like the state of Florida. Loretta loved it, the way you love something that asked nothing of you. Completely, without condition, and without any illusions. She got home at 4:15 that afternoon. She had finished her shift at the Calloway mansion, moved through the rest of her duties with the mechanical competence of long practice, cleaned 3 more rooms, restocked 2 linen closets, and said nothing further to anyone about what had happened in the entry hall. Mrs. Paulson had looked at her twice with something between concern and professional discomfort. Loretta had offered a small smile and returned to work. She had not asked to go home early. She had not filed a report. She hung her coat on the hook by the door and sat down on the couch with her boots still on. Desta came out of the kitchen holding a spatula and a look of barely restrained fury. "Okay," Desta said. "I need you to start talking because I have been waiting since 7 this morning and I have made cornbread. And I only make cornbread when I'm upset. And I burned the first batch, which means I am very upset. So please, Loretta, talk." Loretta looked at the spatula. "Is the second batch okay?" "The second batch is fine. Talk." Loretta leaned back against the cushions and pressed the back of her wrist against her forehead. The red mark on her cheek had faded to a faint shadow, barely visible now, but the memory of the sound sat in her ears like a frequency that wouldn't quite clear. "She slapped me," Loretta said. "I know she slapped you. Garrett told his cousin. His cousin told Imani at the agency. Imani texted me before lunch." Desta lowered the spatula. "What I want to know is what you said to her, because Garrett said you whispered something, and she turned the color of notebook paper." Loretta was quiet for a moment. "I told her I forgave her," she said, "and that I knew her secret." The spatula dropped to Desta's side. "Loretta May Simmons. I know. Do you know what you just... Do you understand what..." Desta sat down on the armchair across from the couch with the urgency of someone whose legs had stopped cooperating. "What secret? You need to explain to me what secret, right now. Because I have been your friend for 4 years, and you have never once mentioned anything about Celestine Calloway having a secret and you knowing it." Loretta looked at her hands in her lap. "Sit with me," she said. Desta moved to the couch. Loretta was quiet for a long moment, not the silence of someone withholding, but the silence of someone deciding where to begin. When she spoke, her voice had the quality of something carefully unwrapped after a long time in storage. "My mother's name was Odalis Simmons," she said. "She died when I was 19. Breast cancer, stage 4, 9 months from diagnosis to the end. She was 43. Desta nodded. She knew this. She had heard pieces of it before. What she told me in those 9 months I wasn't ready to hear. I think she knew that. She told me anyway because she had no more time to wait for me to be ready." Loretta folded her hands. "She told me that before I was born, before she was Odalis Simmons, she worked as a seamstress for a tailoring house on Michigan Avenue. High-end alterations, custom work, very exclusive clientele. She was good at it. She was 24 years old and she loved the work." She paused. "One of the clients was a woman named Celestine Beaumont. That was her name before she married Franklin Calloway. She came in for alterations every few weeks, and she and my mother, they became friendly. Not friends exactly, but the kind of close that happens when one woman is lonely and another is kind. And Celestine Beaumont was very, very lonely." Desta said nothing. She understood that interrupting this would be a kind of damage. "My mother told me that Celestine had a secret, a serious one. She had become pregnant, not with Franklin Calloway's child, but from a relationship she'd had the previous year, before Franklin, a man whose name my mother never learned, or at least never told me. The pregnancy was far enough along that it couldn't be hidden for much longer. And Celestine was 2 months away from her engagement to Franklin Calloway, an engagement that would have collapsed entirely if Franklin's family had discovered she was carrying another man's child." The radiator hissed. Outside, the wind chime across the street rang once and went quiet. "Celestine had the baby," Loretta said. A girl. She delivered in a private clinic, no public record, no announcement. And then she arranged, through a woman my mother only knew as the lawyer, for the child to be given to a family in Indiana. A private adoption, sealed by the court, no trail. Loretta, Desta said, very softly. My mother was the only person Celestine told, the only one who knew the truth, and she was sworn to secrecy, not with a document, not with money, but with the kind of promise you make to someone you've come to trust. My mother kept it for over 30 years, until she got sick. Until she got sick. Loretta nodded slowly. She gave me a letter the week before she died. She said it was from Celestine, written right after the adoption, never sent. She'd been given it to hold, she said, in case it ever mattered. Desta had stopped breathing in any normal way. Is the letter? It's in the drawer, Loretta said. In my bedroom, under the winter sweaters. Neither of them moved for a moment. Loretta. Desta's voice was very careful. The baby that Celestine gave away. Yes. Do you know, has it ever been, do you know who she... No, Loretta said. Not quickly, not defensively, just plainly. I don't know who she grew up to be. I don't know if she ever looked for her birth mother. I don't even know her name. My mother didn't know it either. The adoption was sealed. A long silence settled over the apartment. The cornbread smell drifted in from the kitchen. So Celestine Calloway thinks no one knows, Desta said finally. No one living, as far as she knows. And you told her? I told her I knew her secret. Loretta met Desta's eyes. I didn't tell her what it was. I didn't threaten her. I've been walking past that woman for 11 months, watching her treat people like furniture, and today she put her hand on my face. Something moved briefly in Loretta's expression. Not anger exactly. Something older and quieter. I just wanted her to know that she wasn't as protected as she thought she was. That's all. Desta stared at her for a long, full moment. That's all, she repeated. That's all. Loretta, do you understand what that woman is going to do now? She's not going to sit with it. She has too much to lose. She's going to find out everything she can about you. She's going to... I know, Loretta said quietly. And Theron, did you see his face? He was right there. He heard you. I know. Desta stood up and walked a small circle in the middle of the living room, arms crossed, the spatula still in her hand, conducting her anxiety. I need you to promise me you're not going to do anything else until we think this through. I wasn't planning to do anything. You told a billionaire's mother you knew her secret in front of a room full of witnesses, and you're telling me you weren't planning to do anything. Loretta almost smiled. It came out. It came... Desta put her hand over her eyes. In the study on the 3rd floor of the mansion on Lincoln Park, Theron Calloway sat at his desk and didn't work. He had a report open in front of him, Q4 projections for a development in River North, numbers he normally would have absorbed and annotated in 45 minutes. The numbers were not reaching him. He had read the same paragraph 4 times and retained nothing. He picked up his phone and put it down, picked it up again. He had spent the afternoon managing the aftermath of the morning. 2 calls from HR at Premier Home Services. 1 call from Garrett asking about the incident protocol. 1 very uncomfortable conversation with his general counsel about liability exposure. He had told everyone to stand down. He had not told anyone why. The truth was that he didn't know why. Not precisely. What he knew was this. A woman had stood in his entry hall and absorbed the worst his mother had to offer, and turned it into something that left him feeling, for the first time in recent memory, like the least substantial person in the room. He opened his laptop. He did not search Loretta's name. Not yet. He told himself that. He opened, instead, the internal document system for Premier Home Services. They had a service contract with his household, which meant basic employee profiles were accessible through the vendor portal. He told himself he was doing due diligence. He told himself he was looking at this as a business matter. The profile loaded. Loretta May Simmons, employee since March of last year. Performance record, excellent. No incidents. Client satisfaction rating 4.95.0. Emergency contact, Desta Okafor. He stared at the name. He closed the laptop. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling, at the ornate plaster molding that his mother had insisted on during the renovation 8 years ago, at the light fixture that had cost more than most people spent on a car. He thought about the way Loretta had stood in the hall, the stillness of her, the way she'd looked at his mother, not with hatred, but with something that had made his mother go pale. "I forgive you. I know your secret." He reached for his phone again, but this time he dialed a different number. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Calloway, it's been a minute." "Donovan," Theron said, "I need a favor. Professional, discreet, nothing complicated." He paused. "I need you to look into a sealed adoption record from around 1987, Cook County Court. I'll have whatever case identifiers I can find by tomorrow." A pause on the other end of the line. "This about a person or a property issue?" Theron's eyes moved to the window, to the pewter winter light falling across the rooftops of Lincoln Park. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. He ended the call. He sat in the silence of the study for a long time. Then he opened his desk drawer, the deep one on the left side, the one that held things he hadn't organized in years, and began to look. He found it 40 minutes later, near the back. A manila folder, faded at the corners, labeled in his father's handwriting. Estate, premarital documents. He opened it. Third page in, behind 2 insurance documents and a prenuptial filing summary, was a single sheet, a legal summary of an adoption arranged through a firm called Weybridge and Associates, Cook County, State of Illinois, dated November 1987. The adoptive family name was redacted. The birth mother's name was not. Celestine Ann Beaumont. Theron read the name twice. He read it a third time. He sat with it for a long time, alone in the study, while the Chicago evening settled around the mansion like snow, finding every ledge and corner, filling in the gaps between things, making the world briefly, temporarily, unrecognizable. Then he looked up the address for Premier Home Services, and then, after a moment's hesitation, he looked up the south side. The man who builds towers can't build walls forever. He came on a Thursday. Loretta was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a second-hand copy of a novel she'd been meaning to finish for 6 weeks when she heard the knock. Not the knock of the super, who used 2 knuckles and immediately followed with his master key, regardless of the answer. Not Desta, who had her own key and announced herself by opening the door and saying something before she was even fully inside. This knock was measured, 3 even beats, the knock of someone who had decided to do something and was following through with it precisely. She looked at the door for a moment. She opened it. Theron Calloway was standing in the hallway of her apartment building on West 59th Street, in a charcoal wool overcoat and a dark suit, holding nothing, with the expression of a man who had rehearsed whatever he was about to say and had decided, somewhere between the elevator and the door, to abandon the script entirely. Loretta looked at him. She did not look surprised. She looked, if anything, like she had been expecting this. Not him specifically, not today, but something like him, something that arrived and complicated the careful life she had built around her secret. "Mr. Calloway," she said. "Miss Simmons." He paused. "May I come in?" She considered this for a moment, the question and what it meant that she was considering it. Then she stepped back from the door. He came in. He took in the apartment the way he took in every space, not with judgment, but with attention. The books stacked on every horizontal surface, the framed photograph above the small television, a woman with Loretta's same eyes and a wider smile, standing in front of a lake somewhere in better weather. The faint sound of the wind chime from across the street making its thin music through the single-pane window. "Sit down," Loretta said. He sat on the couch. She sat in the armchair across from it and folded her hands in her lap and waited. Theron leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I found a document," he said, "in my father's files, a legal summary of a sealed adoption. Cook County, 1987. My mother's name is on it as birth mother." Loretta said nothing. "I'm not here to threaten you," he said. "I'm not here on behalf of my mother. She doesn't know I'm here." He met her eyes. "I'm here because I've spent 3 days trying to understand what you said to her, and I think I'm beginning to, and I need to know if I have the right pieces." "What pieces do you have?" Loretta asked. "A birth mother," he said. "A child given away. And you, standing in my house, knowing something that nobody else living seems to know." He paused. "I have my mother's face when you whispered to her. I've seen my mother face down federal auditors. I have never seen her look like that." The radiator hissed. The wind chime rang once and went quiet. "What is it you're actually asking me?" Loretta said. He looked at her steadily. "Are you the child?" The question sat between them, like a stone dropped into deep water, the impact brief and precise, the ripples spreading wide. Loretta looked at her hands. "I don't know," she said. He hadn't expected that. She saw it in the small shift of his expression, the recalibration. "My mother never told me who she was," Loretta said. "The birth mother. She only told me the story. She gave me a letter that Celestine wrote and never sent, but the adoption was sealed. There are no names in what my mother left me, not the birth mother's, not the child's." "But you suspect," Theron said. A long pause. "The timing matches," Loretta said carefully. "The circumstances match. The tailoring house on Michigan Avenue where my mother worked. I found it in an old business directory once. Beaumont Alterations was a client there in 1986 and 1987. Celestine Beaumont." She paused. "And the letter my mother kept. There are things in it that a person would only write to someone they were certain would never read it. Things about guilt, about what she hoped for the child, about a woman named Odalis, who was the only person in the world she trusted." Theron went very still. "My mother's name was Odalis," Loretta said. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people standing at the edge of something vast and choosing, very carefully, how close to step. "I should go," Theron said finally. But he didn't move. "You should," Loretta agreed, but she didn't look away. He stood. He picked up his coat from the arm of the couch. He turned toward the door and then stopped, his back to her, one hand on the frame. "For what it's worth," he said without turning around, "what she did to you in my house, in front of my staff, that's not something I can let pass. It doesn't matter who you are or aren't. It was wrong." Loretta was quiet for a moment. "I know it was," she said, "but I don't need you to punish her for it." He turned then. He looked at her across the small apartment, across the books and the photograph and the borrowed furniture and the thin January light coming through the window. "What do you need?" he asked. Nobody had asked her that in a very long time. She felt it land somewhere below her sternum, gentle and exact as a key finding a lock. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. He nodded once. He left. She sat in the chair for a long time after the door closed, holding the shape of the conversation the way you hold something fragile, carefully with both hands, aware that the pressure required to keep it from falling is exactly the pressure that could break it. Celestine Calloway did not sleep well that week. She lay in the dark of her bedroom, 800 thread count Egyptian cotton, the sound machine her doctor had recommended set to white noise. Temperature regulated to 68 degrees, and stared at the ceiling. She had built this room to be a sanctuary. It was failing at the job. She called her attorney on Friday morning before 7. "I need you to find out everything there is to know about a woman named Loretta Mae Simmons, 26 years old, south side of Chicago, works for a cleaning service called Premier Home Services. Employment history, rental history, family background, education, everything. Celestine, is there a specific legal concern or, consider it a security background check," she said. "I want it by Sunday." She hung up. She sat at her vanity and looked at herself in the mirror, at the silver hair she kept immaculate, at the eyes that had watched 62 years of the world and decided long ago what was worth carrying and what could be set down. She had always been good at decisions, at management. She had managed her way into one of the most powerful families in Chicago and out of a past that had threatened to unmake her, through a marriage and a widowhood and a son who had become everything she'd wanted without ever becoming simple. She had managed the one thing she'd been certain would return someday, the secret she'd carried since 1987, by simply never speaking of it. Not to Franklin, who had died without knowing, not to Theron, not to anyone living except Odalis. Odalis, who had died and taken the secret with her. She had believed that. She had needed to believe it. "I forgive you. I know your secret." The whispered words had not been a threat. That was what she couldn't stop turning over in her mind, what made it worse rather than better. Threats she knew how to handle. This had been offered with forgiveness in the voice, as if the judgment had already been rendered and found against all reason to be merciful. And mercy from a stranger was a far more destabilizing thing than accusation. By Saturday, Theron had not called his mother back. He had instead done something he almost never did, cancelled his afternoon, told his assistant he was unavailable until Monday, and driven himself south along Lakeshore Drive with no particular destination. He ended up parked near the Museum of Science and Industry, engine idling, watching people move through the January cold. He was a man who built things. He understood load-bearing elements and stress points and the places where pressure, left unmanaged, produced failure. He did not understand what was happening inside him. He had spent 3 days telling himself that his interest in Loretta Simmons was investigative, practical. He was good at practical frameworks. But he kept thinking about her hands folded in her lap. He kept thinking about the way she'd said, "I don't know yet," with complete honesty, no performance, no strategy. He kept thinking about the photograph on her wall. He drove back north. He stopped at a small florist on Michigan Avenue and stood in front of the cases, feeling faintly ridiculous until he bought white tulips, the least performative thing in the shop, and drove south again. Desta answered the door. She looked at him. She looked at the tulips. She looked back at him, with the frank, comprehensive attention of someone who had been lied to before and learned from it. "She's at the community garden on Halstead," Desta said finally. "There's a greenhouse section. She goes Saturdays." She paused. "Don't make her regret that I told you." He found her 20 minutes later, among raised beds of winter greens, wearing a heavy canvas coat, her hair loose for the first time he'd seen it, her gloved hands working the soil around the base of a tomato plant that had no business flourishing in January, but had clearly decided to anyway. She was completely absorbed, completely herself. No awareness of being observed, no performance, no armor. When she looked up and saw him, she went still. Then she looked at the tulips, the professional composure he'd seen every other time, the careful distance. shifted just slightly, not gone, but opened the way a window opens, still framed, still bounded, but letting something through. "You found me," she said. "Your friend helped." "Of course she did." Something close to a smile. "Desta thinks she's a matchmaker." He walked to where she was standing between two rows of herbs and held out the tulips. She took them. She looked at them for a moment with an expression he couldn't fully name. "I don't know what's happening," he said. "Between whatever this is with my mother and whatever I feel when I'm—" He stopped, tried again. "I build things for a living. I'm very good at knowing exactly what I'm doing and why. Right now, I don't know either of those things." "Discomfort means something real is happening," she said softly. He looked at her. She looked back at him. The greenhouse held them in its warm, green, living air, and outside the Chicago January pressed against the glass, and neither of them moved. And the space between them was 4 feet of damp soil and potted herbs, and the beginning of something that neither of them had planned for, and neither of them could quite bring themselves to step back from. Then her phone buzzed. She looked at it. A number she didn't recognize, a 312 area code. She answered. "Ms. Simmons." A woman's voice, clipped and professional. "This is Renata Gould with Holloway and Gould Legal Associates. I'm calling on behalf of a client who has asked me to relay a message." A pause. "My client would like to offer you a settlement, a confidential agreement, in exchange for your complete discretion regarding any private matters you may have become aware of. The figure discussed begins at $250,000. My client believes this is a fair and generous—" Loretta ended the call. She stood in the greenhouse with the dead phone in her hand and the tulips against her hip, and looked at nothing in particular for a moment. "My mother," Theron said. He had heard enough. His voice was flat in a way that was worse than anger. "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize for her," Loretta said. "Loretta, I'm not angry," she said, and he believed her, which was the most extraordinary thing about it. She didn't look angry. She looked tired in a specific way, the way you look when something you expected finally arrives, and the expectation was not a comfort. "I'm going to go home now," she said. "I need to think." She handed him back the tulips. Not returned, exactly. More like placed. With care. The gesture of someone who was not closing a door, but leaving it for the moment unlocked. He stood in the greenhouse holding white tulips and watched her go. Blood doesn't lie, but families do. The DNA testing center on North Wabash Avenue was a clean, quiet office that looked more like a financial planner's waiting room than a medical facility. Beige walls, framed prints of abstract watercolors, a receptionist who wore reading glasses and spoke in the measured, neutral tone of someone trained to handle situations in which ordinary language was insufficient. Loretta had made the appointment herself on a Monday morning without telling anyone. Not Desta, not Theron, who had called twice since the greenhouse and left messages she had listened to and not yet returned. She had made the appointment because she had lived for 7 years with a story her mother had told her, and she had spent those 7 years choosing, deliberately, not to pursue it. And then she had whispered 4 words in a marble hallway, and the story had begun pursuing her, and she had decided that the only way through was forward. She gave a cheek swab. She filled out the paperwork. She listed her mother as deceased. She checked the box for maternal lineage testing and paid the fee. The receptionist told her results would be ready in 5 to 7 business days and gave her a small card with a case number on it. Loretta thanked her and went to work. The call from Theron's private number came on a Wednesday evening. "I need to talk to you," he said when she answered. "Not about my mother, not about the document, about something else." "What's something else?" she said. A pause. "How I feel about you." She sat down on the edge of her bed. Outside, the wind was doing something aggressive to the street. She could hear it finding the gap in the window frame, that particular whistle she'd been meaning to have the super fix since October. "Theron," she said. "I know," he said. "I know the timing is insane. I know there's a question hanging over everything that we don't have an answer to yet. I know that I showed up at your door, uninvited twice in 1 week, and bought you flowers in a greenhouse and stood there like—" He stopped. "I'm not good at this," he said. "I'm good at a lot of things. This isn't one of them. Talking about feelings." "Feeling them," he said. "This much. This fast." She was quiet for a long moment. The wind found the gap and whistled once and stopped. "I got tested," she said, "for the DNA on Monday." Silence on his end. Then, "Does that mean you want to know?" "It means I need to know," she said. "There's a difference. When do you get the results? Friday or Monday?" Another silence. Longer. Waited. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And I need you to hear it before the results come back, not after. I need you to hear it when it doesn't have anything to do with what those results say." She waited. "Whatever that test shows, whatever you are or aren't to my mother, it doesn't change what I know about you. It doesn't change what it felt like to watch you stand in that hall and refuse to be diminished. It doesn't change the greenhouse or the apartment or the way you said, 'I don't know yet,' like honesty was just a thing you defaulted to naturally, the way other people default to strategy." He paused. "I've known you for 2 weeks, and I can't stop thinking about you, and that's either the most inconvenient thing that's ever happened to me or the most important one. I haven't decided which." Loretta pressed her fingers to her lips, not to stop herself from speaking, just to hold something in. Some feeling that needed a moment to be felt before it was named. "Wait for the results," she said finally. "Not because I'm telling you to feel less, but because I don't want either of us to have a conversation that the results might complicate. And if they don't complicate it, then we'll have a very different conversation. Will you let me know when you find out?" "Yes," she said. "I'll let you know." She hung up and sat in the dark of her bedroom and let herself, for just a few minutes, feel the extraordinary and unlikely weight of wanting something she hadn't allowed herself to want in a very long time. The results came back on Friday afternoon. Loretta was on her lunch break, sitting in her car with a sandwich she wasn't eating when the notification arrived. She clicked through to the secure portal and entered her case number with fingers that were steadier than she expected. The page loaded. She read it once. She read it again. She put the phone face down on the passenger seat and sat with her hands in her lap and breathed. Then she picked it up and read it a third time, because the first 2 times felt like insufficient processing for the kind of news that reorganizes the entire architecture of your understanding of your own life. She was not Celestine Calloway's biological daughter. The maternal lineage test was conclusive. No match. Whatever the connection between Loretta and the Calloway family, it was not blood. The child given away in 1987 was not her. She sat in the car for 23 minutes. She ate half the sandwich without tasting it. Then she called Theron. He answered on the first ring. "I got the results," she said. She heard him take one careful breath. "Tell me," he said. "I'm not her," she said. "I'm not Celestine's daughter. No match." The silence on his end was complex, relief in it, and something else, something freed. "Loretta," he said, and her name in his voice had a texture she hadn't heard before, direct and unguarded, released from the particular restraint that the other possibility had required. "Are you okay?" She thought about it honestly. "I don't know yet," she said. "I think I'm something. I'm not sure what. Can I come to you?" She thought about the answer she'd been quietly making since the greenhouse, the one she'd been holding in reserve. Yes, she said. He was there in 40 minutes. She had changed out of her work clothes. She had made tea, though she was not drinking it. When she let him in, they stood for a moment in the middle of the living room, simply looking at each other, no pretense, no management, just two people with the truth between them, cleared now of the worst of its complications. "I'm sorry," he said, "that you came this far, and the answer was no." "I'm not sure I was looking," she said. "I think the story found me." "Does it change things? For you?" She thought about Celestine, about the woman in the marble hall who had raised her hand, and about the woman who had written a letter she never sent, and about the child somewhere in the world who had grown up without knowing. She thought about whether forgiveness required blood or just the willingness to see a person fully, including the worst of them. "I don't know who Celestine's daughter is," Loretta said. "But my mother kept that letter for 30 years because she thought it mattered. That part doesn't change." Theron nodded. He sat on the couch. She sat beside him, not across the room, not in the armchair, but beside him, which was its own kind of answer. "I need to talk to her," he said, "about all of it. The adoption, the letter, what she did to you. She's been living with this for 37 years, and it's eating her." He paused. "I don't know if she's capable of—" "She's capable," Loretta said quietly. "How do you know that?" "Because she wrote that letter," Loretta said. "Whatever she is, whatever she's done, the woman who wrote that letter was capable of love and guilt and hope. Those things don't disappear. They get buried." She paused. "People bury things when they're afraid, and people who bury things can also dig them up." He was looking at her in the way she was beginning to recognize, the specific attention of someone trying to memorize something while it was still in front of them. "Loretta," he said, "yes. I need to say something that has nothing to do with my mother or the document or the results." "Say it," she said. "I'm in love with you," he said. "I don't know how to be more precise than that right now, but it's the most true thing I know at this moment, and I needed you to hear it." She looked at him for a long time. His face was open in the way that faces are open when they've let go of the last of their reserve. No strategy, no architecture between the feeling and the expression of it. The man who ran a billion-dollar firm and moved through rooms like a weather system was sitting on her second-hand couch in his suit, with his heart completely unprotected, waiting. "Theron," she said, "you have known me for 2.5 weeks. "I know. You're in the middle of a personal crisis involving your family. I'm aware. And you just watched me find out that the thing I thought connected me to your world isn't real. What you thought connected you to my world was my mother," he said. "I'd prefer to be the connection myself, if that's available." She was quiet for a long moment, and then the feeling she'd been pressing her fingers to her lips to contain 3 nights ago on the edge of her bed finally began to surface. "I'm not going to tell you what I feel right now," she said. "Not because I don't know, but because I need you to do something first." "What?" "Go talk to your mother," she said. "Not for me, for her. She's been carrying this alone for 37 years, and she's terrified, and she needs her son." She met his eyes fully. "I need to know that you're the kind of man who does that before he pursues what he wants, because I already know you want me. What I don't know yet is who you are when someone else needs something more than you do." He looked at her for a long time. Then he stood. He picked up his coat. At the door, he paused. "I'll go tonight," he said. "Good," she said. She closed the door behind him and stood with her back against it and looked up at the ceiling of her small apartment and felt, in the space between her ribs, something she hadn't felt in so long it almost startled her. Hope. Uncomplicated, impractical, entirely her own. He rang the mansion's doorbell at 9:15 that evening. Celestine answered herself. which meant she'd seen the camera feed, which meant she'd known he was coming, which meant some part of her had been waiting. She was dressed down for the first time he could remember, a silk robe, hair loose, no pearls. She looked, without the armor, older and smaller, and more like someone he recognized from a long time ago. He came in. He sat in the study with her. He placed the manila folder on the table between them, the one from his father's files, and left it there without opening it. "I know," he said. "I know about 1987. I know about the child. I know about Odalis Simmons." Celestine looked at the folder. She looked at her hands in her lap. And then, for the first time in his entire life, Theron Calloway watched his mother cry. Not the controlled emotion of a difficult board meeting or a funeral she'd prepared herself for. Real crying. The kind that came from somewhere old and private, and that had been waiting behind a locked door for 37 years, and had decided, tonight, that the door had held long enough. He moved to the couch beside her. He did not speak. He put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him the way she had not since he was a child, and they sat together in the enormous quiet of the mansion while the Chicago night settled around them. "I need you to tell me everything," he said gently. "Not what I need to know. Everything." She pulled in a breath. She let it out slowly, like releasing something she had held for a very long time, and she began. At midnight, Loretta's phone buzzed once on her nightstand. A text from Theron's number. "She told me everything, all of it. We talked for 3 hours. She waited. I'm going to find the daughter, the real one. My mother wants to. I don't know if it'll work, but she wants to try." Another pause. Then, "And Loretta, she asked me to tell you something. She said, 'Tell her I understand now what Odalis gave her, and that she's sorry. Not the lawyer kind, the real kind.'" Loretta set the phone down on her chest and stared at the ceiling. Outside, the wind had stopped. The street was quiet. The radiator had settled into its nighttime rhythm, a low, steady warmth with no complaint. She picked the phone back up. "Tell her I know," she typed, "and that I meant what I said." She sent it. She turned off the light. She was asleep within minutes, the deep, unhurried sleep of someone who has set something down that they've been carrying for a long time, and found, to their surprise, that their hands felt fine. A woman who forgives doesn't have to stay. She was gone by Sunday morning. Desta found out the way she found out most things, too late and all at once. She came into the apartment at 9:15 with coffee and the particular energy of someone who had information to share, and found the bedroom door open, the bed made with the specific tightness of someone who had made it and did not intend to unmake it again for a while. The closet was half empty. The photograph was gone from above the television, the one of the woman with Loretta's eyes, standing in front of a lake in better weather. On the kitchen table, a note. 2 sentences in Loretta's handwriting, which was small and even and did not slant. "I need some time to understand what's mine and what I was just carrying for someone else. I'll call you when I land." Desta read it twice. She sat down at the kitchen table and looked at the empty wall where the photograph had been. Then she picked up her phone and called Theron. He arrived at the apartment within 30 minutes, still in the clothes he'd slept in, or not slept in, because he'd been awake most of the night at the mansion with his mother and had driven home at 3 in the morning and sat in his own kitchen without turning the lights on, thinking about Loretta's voice on the phone and what it had meant that she'd said good when he told her he'd go to his mother that night. He had been planning to call her in the morning. He had been planning to say the things that needed to be said in daylight, with both of them rested, without the weight of the previous weeks pressing against every word. He read the note Desta handed him. He read it again. "Where did she go?" he asked. Desta crossed her arms. "I have a guess, but I need you to answer something first." He looked at her. "What are your intentions toward my friend?" Desta said, not sarcastically, not performatively. With the plainness of someone who had earned the right to ask the question directly and intended to use it. Theron was quiet for a moment. "I intend to spend a considerable amount of time with her," he said, "if she'll allow it. And to—" He stopped. He tried again. "I've spent my adult life building things that last. I'd like to build something with her." Desta studied him the way she studied most things, thoroughly, without rushing. "Toronto," she said. He frowned. "What?" "That's where she went. Her grandmother, her adoptive grandmother, the woman who raised her mother before Odalis moved to Chicago. She's still in Toronto. 91 years old, lives in a house in Scarborough. Loretta goes once a year, sometimes twice, whenever something big happens and she needs to be near someone who knew her mother." Desta paused. "She's trying to figure out which parts of this story belong to her and which parts she was just the keeper of. She needs to go back to the beginning to do that." Theron nodded slowly. "One more thing," Desta said. "If you go after her, and I can see that you're going to, don't go there to change her mind about anything. Don't go with a plan. Go because you want to be wherever she is." She met his eyes. "She's spent her whole life being useful to other people's stories. If you want to be part of her life, you have to be interested in hers. Not in what she knows, not in what she might be, not in what she means to your family, hers." He held her gaze. "Understood," he said. "Good." Desta uncrossed her arms. "There's a direct flight to Toronto at 2:15 out of O'Hare." The house in Scarborough sat on a street of modest, well-kept homes, 2 blocks from a park, in the kind of neighborhood where people shoveled their neighbors' walks without being asked and left bags of extra produce from their gardens on front porches in the summer. It was a small house, white aluminum siding, green shutters, a front porch with 2 chairs that sat under a dusting of January snow. A wind chime hung from the porch ceiling, similar to the one across from Loretta's apartment in Chicago. Not the same, but recognizable. Loretta had been sitting on the front steps for 20 minutes when Theron's rental car turned onto the street. She heard the car before she saw it. She looked up. She watched it park at the curb. She watched him get out, in a coat not heavy enough for a Toronto January, and stand on the sidewalk looking at her. She did not look surprised. She did not look away. He walked up the front path and stopped at the bottom of the steps. He put his hands in his coat pockets because the cold was determined. "Desta told you," she said. "Desta told me." "What else did she tell you?" "That I shouldn't come with a plan." Loretta looked at him for a long moment. Then she moved to one side on the step and looked at the space beside her. He sat down. The street was quiet. A dog barked somewhere a few blocks over and then stopped. The bare trees along the sidewalk held their snow with a kind of patient dignity, the way old things hold difficult conditions. "Her name is Celestine May Osei," Loretta said after a while. "My grandmother. She came from Ghana in 1962. She was 22 years old, and she had $40 and a dress pattern in her suitcase. She made clothes out of her apartment for 15 years, until she could afford to open a shop. She raised my mother in that shop." She paused. "She is 91 years old, and she still corrects my posture." "She sounds formidable," Theron said. "She's the most formidable person I've ever met. And I met you." He smiled just slightly. "I'll take that as a relative compliment." "It is." She wrapped her arms around her knees. "She told me something this morning. She told me that my mother, Odalis, never wanted me to carry this. The story about Celestine. She said Odalis only told me because she was afraid the letter would be found after she died, and she didn't want me to be blindsided by it with no context." Loretta paused. "She said my mother thought telling me would help me set it down. She didn't realize that I'd pick it up instead." "Do you regret it?" Theron asked. going to the Callaways, the whole 11 months. She thought about it genuinely. No, she said. I think I was supposed to go. Not for Celestine's sake or yours or anyone else's. She looked at the snow on the steps. I think I went because the story needed to finish, because my mother kept that letter for 30 years and she deserved to have it matter, even if the mattering happened after she was gone. He turned to look at her profile, the high cheekbones, the amber eyes, the quality of stillness she carried even in motion. In the flat winter light of a Toronto afternoon, she looked like someone drawn by a careful hand, someone made with intention. "Can I tell you something?" he said. "Yes. I've spent 15 years running a company that shapes skylines. I've built things that will stand for 100 years. I've been in rooms with senators, with foreign investors, with people whose names are on buildings and airports." He paused. "I have never in my life met anyone who made me feel the way you do when you say I don't know yet, like it's a complete sentence." She turned to look at him. "I mean the not knowing," he said. "I mean the way you hold uncertainty without letting it make you small. I've built my whole career on eliminating uncertainty, on having the answer before anyone asks the question, and you carry it, like it's not the enemy." She was quiet for a moment. "My grandmother taught me that," she said. "She used to say, the people who need all the answers before they act are the people who are afraid of what the answers might be. The people who can move without knowing, those are the ones who trust themselves." He looked at her for a long time. "Move without knowing," he said. "Yes. Like coming to Toronto. Like coming to Toronto." He nodded slowly. "Like following a woman to Toronto because you couldn't stay in Chicago while she was here." The corner of her mouth moved. "Like that," she said. He reached out and took her hand, not dramatically, not as an announcement. The way you take someone's hand when you have arrived somewhere and want them to know you arrived on purpose, the simple, declarative warmth of it. She looked down at their hands. She looked up at the bare trees. She breathed in the cold Toronto air, which smelled of snow and wood smoke, and the faint sweetness of something baking somewhere nearby. "She wants to come," she said. He frowned. "Who?" "Celestine." She let the word sit. "I know. I'm not saying invite her. I'm saying, when I talked to my grandmother this morning, she asked me about the woman behind the secret, not the woman who slapped me, the woman who wrote the letter." Loretta paused. "And I described her. And my grandmother was quiet for a long time, and then she said, 'That woman has been sitting in a room with her guilt for 37 years. That is a very long sentence for anyone to serve.' She said, 'When you're ready, bring her here. Let me look at her.'" Theron was very still. "My grandmother is 91 years old," Loretta said. "She was Odalis's mother. She is the only person alive who has the standing to say whether this is finished or not." She turned to look at him. "And she's not finished." He exhaled slowly. "Loretta, I know what I'm saying. You've been slapped. You've been offered money to disappear. You've been used as the key to a secret that was never yours to carry. And you're sitting on a stoop in the January cold in Canada, telling me you want to bring my mother here to meet your grandmother." "I'm not saying I want to," she said. "I'm saying it might be what's needed. There's a difference." The smallest smile crossed her face. "I keep telling you there's a difference." He looked at her. Something behind his eyes shifted, the last of a reserve he'd been holding giving way quietly, without drama. "What do you need from me?" he asked. His voice was low, real. She turned to face him fully, there on the cold steps in front of the small house, with the wind chime and the green shutters, with the snow on the porch chairs and the dog barking again 2 blocks over. "I need you to still be this person," she said. 6 months from now, a year from now, When the urgency has worn off, and the newness is gone and it's just Tuesday, and I'm in my work clothes smelling like eucalyptus cleaner, and there's nothing dramatic happening, I need you to still want to sit on steps with me. I'll sit on steps with you in any weather, he said. That's a very easy thing to say right now. I know, he said. Ask me again in a year. She held his gaze. Something crossed her face. The last of a guard she'd been keeping, setting down quietly without ceremony. Okay, she said. Okay? Okay, she said again. A year. He brought her hand up and pressed his mouth to her knuckles slowly, with a care that had nothing performative in it. She felt it travel up her arm and settle somewhere in her chest, warm and specific, like a word finally said in the right language. Inside the house, a light came on in the front room. Through the window, the silhouette of a small, upright woman moved past the curtain, deliberate in her movements, certain of her space, formidable even in silhouette. Loretta watched the window. "She's going to want to meet you," she said. "Should I be nervous?" he said. "You should be honest," she said. "With her, that's the same thing." She stood. She held out her hand. He took it and stood beside her. She led him up the steps and knocked on the door of the house where her story had begun, before she was born, in the hands of a woman named Odalis, who had kept a letter for 30 years and never quite managed to set it down. And the door opened, and the warmth of the house came out to meet them, and the wind chime above the porch rang once, clearly, in the cold afternoon air. The woman she slapped became the woman she needed. Celestine Calloway had not been on a commercial flight in 11 years. She stood at the Air Canada gate at O'Hare with one carry-on bag, just one, because Theron had told her gently but clearly to bring only what she needed and to arrive the way anyone arrived. And she waited for her boarding group to be called, and she was recognized by no one, and no one brought her anything. She sat in her window seat in economy class, and when the plane lifted and Chicago fell away below her and the lake spread out to the east like hammered pewter, she did something she had not planned. She cried, quietly, into the collar of her coat, turned toward the window. Not from sadness exactly, from the particular pressure of a life making a turn it had needed to make for a very long time. Theron met her at the arrivals hall. He hugged her, the real kind, not the formal kind, and she let herself lean into him, and she did not manage her expression. In the car, he told her what to expect. "Her name is Celestine May Osei," he said. 91 years old. She was Odalis's adoptive mother. She raised her from the age of 4 in Toronto. He paused. "She knows who you are. She asked to meet you." The shared name. He had explained this gently, the coincidence that did not quite feel like one. The elder Celestine was waiting. She's not angry, Theron said, but she's direct. She'll say exactly what she thinks. She'll expect the same from you. Celestine Calloway looked out at the Toronto streets moving past. Brick storefronts, clear salted sidewalks, a man walking a very large dog with tremendous cheerfulness for a February morning. She thought about what it meant to be direct. She had spent 62 years being precise without being direct, measuring every word for its protective value, its strategic function, its management of perception. "All right," she said. The house in Scarborough was small and certain and warm with the smell of something cooked with ginger. Loretta opened the door in a burgundy sweater, her hair down, herself, without the uniform, without the distance. She looked at Celestine without walls. Not with warmth yet, but without walls. "Come in," she said. The elder Celestine May Osei sat in a high-backed chair by the window with a knitted blanket across her lap and eyes that were dark and bright and moved with the quickness of a mind that had not slowed to match her body. She wore a dress the color of a new leaf. She looked at Celestine Calloway the way a person looks at a photograph they have heard described many times and are finally seeing. "Sit down," she said. They sat. Theron settled beside Loretta on the small sofa. Celestine Calloway sat across from the elder woman with her hands in her lap. "My daughter loved you," the elder said. "That was the first thing Loretta told me. Not what you did, not what you hid. First, she said, 'Grandma, there was a woman who was Mama's friend, and Mama loved her. Odalis didn't trust easily. If she trusted you, you must have deserved it once.'" Celestine Calloway's throat moved. "I did not deserve it," she said. Something long controlled had loosened in her voice. "I asked her for a great deal. I gave her nothing in return except a secret to keep, and she kept it until she couldn't keep herself." "She didn't give it to Loretta to use against you," the elder said. "You understand that?" "I do now. She gave it to her because she didn't want Loretta blindsided by it. She thought telling her would release her from it." A small pause. "It didn't work out that way." "No, it didn't." The elder looked at her steadily. "I am not going to tell you that you are forgiven. That isn't mine to give. The one who could give it is gone, and the one beside my grandson there has already given it." She glanced at Loretta, briefly, tenderly. "What I will tell you is that you can stop carrying this now, not because it didn't matter. It did, but the carrying has gone on long enough." She set her teacup down with finality. "The question isn't what you did in 1987. The question is what you do with the time you have left." Celestine Calloway sat without armor, without jewelry, without management of any kind, and looked at the elder woman across from her. Something passed between them that did not need to be named. "I'm looking for her," Celestine said. "The child, Theron, is helping. We've engaged a search firm." She paused. "I don't know if she'll want to know me. I'm prepared for that. But she should have the choice." The elder nodded once, slowly. "That's right," she said. "That's exactly right." Loretta found Theron in the kitchen, making tea with the careful attention of a man determined to get it right in someone else's house. She leaned against the counter. He reached into his jacket, hanging on the chair since he arrived, and took out an envelope, old paper, yellowed at the fold lines. The front said only, "For Odalis, in case." Loretta went still. "My mother brought it," he said. "The original. She'd kept it for 40 years and couldn't throw it away. She asked me to give it to you. She said it belongs with you now." Loretta reached out and took it. She held it in both hands. Not significant in grams, but significant in the way things are significant when they have been held a long time and are finally set where they belong. "I want to read it later," she said. "Alone." "Of course," he said. She set it on the counter carefully, the way you set something down when you intend to come back to it. Then she looked at him, badly made tea, too thin coat, standing in her grandmother's kitchen, and felt something she had spent most of her adult life being careful about feeling, complete, present, arrived. "Ask me," she said. He crossed the kitchen and took both her hands. "Will you let me love you?" he said. "Not the idea of you, not what you know or what you survived or what you mean to my family, just you, Loretta May Simmons, who fixes scuff marks and grows tomatoes in January and says I don't know yet like it's enough." He paused. "Will you let me do that, for as long as you'll have me?" She thought about her mother, who had decided to be a stranger's friend before they'd earned it, and had carried their secret for 30 years, and had sent her daughter into the world with a story and a letter and a name that led somewhere neither of them could have planned. "Yes," she said, simply, the way she said most true things. He kissed her. In the small kitchen of her grandmother's house, with badly made tea on the counter and snow on the windows and laughter coming from the sitting room. And it was not dramatic, and it was not cinematic, and it was not the kind of kiss that needed an audience. It was the kind that happens at the beginning of something real. The ceremony was small. Reverend Orlan Addo, the elder Celestine's pastor of 40 years, a man who had performed enough weddings to know the grandest ones were rarely the truest, drove in from Scarborough on a Thursday morning in late April, when the snow had finally finished with Chicago, and the trees were doing what trees do when they have been patient long enough. 14 people. The community garden on Halstead. The greenhouse. Because Loretta had said she wanted to be married somewhere, something was growing, and Theron had said whatever you want without pause. Celestine sat in the third row in a dress the colour of winter wheat. Not black, not formal grey. Something quieter, chosen with different consideration. She had done her own hair. She wore the old pearls, shorter, older, from before Franklin, from before all of it. She sat straight. She did not cry during the vows. She cried after, when Reverend Orlan said, "What has been broken can be mended, and what has been kept in darkness can be brought into the light. And it is not too late, and it is never too late." And if anyone noticed, they did not look at her directly, which was its own form of grace. When Loretta and Theron turned to face the small gathering, Loretta looked for Celestine first. She found her standing in the third row. Her expression was not the one she wore in marble halls or boardrooms. It was the expression of a woman given something she did not expect and did not deserve, and had enough wisdom left to receive it with open hands. Celestine mouthed 2 words. No sound, no performance. "Thank you." Loretta nodded once. After, when laughter was filling the greenhouse the way warm air fills cold spaces, gradually then completely, Celestine found Loretta alone for a moment near the tomato plants. She opened her bag and took out a small flat package, tissue paper. "A narrow ribbon. I want you to have this," Celestine said, "not as payment, not as apology. There is no amount of anything that functions as apology for what I did. This is—" The careful sentence structure that had always been her first instrument failed her, and she let it fail. "This is something I should have given you the day I understood who you were, who your mother was to me." Loretta unwrapped it slowly. A letter. Old paper, yellowed at the folds. A handwriting she had never seen before but recognized immediately. The same hand as the letter under her winter sweaters, the one her mother had left her. But longer, addressed in full. For Odalis, and for whoever she loves best when the time comes. Loretta stood in the greenhouse on her wedding day and felt her mother in the room, not as grief, but as presence. The particular presence of someone whose love has outlasted them, which is the only kind of immortality anyone actually gets. "She wrote this one for you," Celestine said quietly. "I think she always knew there would be a you. She just didn't know your name." "Neither did she," Loretta said, "until she named me." She pressed her hand briefly over Celestine's, one moment warm and complete, then turned back toward Theron, who was watching from across the greenhouse with the expression of a man who has arrived somewhere he intended to go and found it to be exactly as it needed to be. She walked toward him through the warm air, past Desta, who said something that made 3 people laugh at once, past Reverend Orlan eating Desta's cornbread and nodding with deep professional appreciation. She walked toward her husband. She held her mother's letter against her heart. Outside, through the glass, April was doing what it does in Chicago after a long winter, arriving without apology, insisting on itself, turning every surface that had been grey and quiet for months towards something green and beginning and irrevocably, unstoppably alive. End.